Hi folks, this is Dr. Rob Cywes, the Carb Addiction Doc, and today we're going to talk about a really nasty disease. I just praise the Lord that I have not been afflicted by this myself. We're talking about gout. Gout. Pain in the big toe and other joints. So let's talk a little bit about gout. Gout is primarily caused by crystals that form in the joint space. And those crystals, think of this as like a bunch of needles forming in that joint space and sticking into the cartilage in your joints and forming these little stones so that every time you move, it causes a huge amount of inflammation. There's an inflammatory reaction. In fact, over time, gout can actually cause arthritis if it doesn't get better, and can actually destroy that joint space, particularly in the big toes, but all joints, particularly the smaller joints, are susceptible to these crystals or little stones forming in your joints. Now, the dominant substance that causes these stones is something called uric acid or urate. And uric acid is something that is a natural byproduct of what we eat and drink. So we absorb certain amounts of foods that contain a substance called purines. Purines are part of our DNA, part of our RNA, but purines occur in food, and as that gets metabolized, they get broken down into uric acid. And then uric acid is commonly combined with ammonia and gets excreted by the kidney. So in a healthy human being, we eat a healthy diet, and I'll describe that in a second, that is fairly rich in purines. In fact, the bizarre part is the healthiest diets are very high in purine content. And it doesn't matter if you think healthy is more on the vegan side or more on the carnivore side. There's a ton of purines in both diets. But we eat those purines, the liver processes them, breaks them down to uric acid, and in the kidney they get combined with ammonia and we pee them out. So the problems can occur at three levels. First of all, excessive consumption, which is very difficult to do. Very difficult to do. There are a couple of scenarios. For example, if you're an alcoholic and you drink a ton of red wine, that may be a problem, but it's usually a combination of all three. So the first one is excessive consumption of purines. The second one is a broken liver. A liver that cannot adequately handle purines, where the system, the pathway that breaks those purines down into uric acid is broken, and there's a massive accumulation of uric acid production by the liver. And the third factor is if the kidney is not effectively able to get rid of that uric acid. Then what happens is that uric acid builds up in the bloodstream, it settles in the joints, and you have these attacks of gouts. So any three of those dysfunctions can cause gout. A sudden rapid increase intake. For example, if you go on a bender and you drink a ton of red wine, or you sit down and you pig out on carnivores, liver, or small fatty fish like anchovies or whatever it may be, or if you eat a ton of beans and peas on a vegan diet. Doesn't matter where you stand, but there are certain vegetables and fruits, peas and beans, liver, small fish, and certainly alcohol are all huge sources of purines, as well as, we love this word, autophagy. As your body breaks down cells, if you have an injury, if you have trauma to your body, if you've just started exercising, you can release these purines that the liver has to metabolize. Now, the liver is really, really good at dealing with purines. That's why most people don't get gout. It's really, really good at that. Okay? What screws the liver up are two things. If you go on a bender and you consume a lot of high purine alcohol like red wine, there's an influx, there's a lot of purines in the red wine, in the diet that you take, other alcohols, pretty much any alcohol, but also alcohol in excess affects the metabolic pathways of the liver, particularly an enzyme called lactate dehydrogenase, and that allows the uric acid to accumulate. And that then floods the bloodstream with uric acid. Typically, there's also a certain amount of acute dysfunction to the kidneys based on that alcohol. The kidney's not able to get rid of all that uric acid, and you have a gout attack. So that's the pathway by which it happens, where you've got the trifecta of increased sudden purine intake, dysfunction or paralysis of the liver's metabolic processes or overloading of that process, and then of lack of renal excretion, and you get your flare of gout. And it's not uncommon for people that have had a history of gout to start a carnivorous diet or start a keto diet and actually get a flare of gout because the liver is still under conditions of, and here's the key thing, we talked about alcohol. The other dominant factor that causes disturbance in uric acid production and purine metabolism is our old friend insulin resistance. And insulin resistance comes from chronic excessive carbohydrate consumption. Insulin resistance is a powerful trigger of purine dysmetabolism that generates higher uric acid levels. So it takes purine consumption, also purine release from your cells, and a dysfunctional processing pathway in the liver, primarily triggered, because not everybody's going to drink a ton of alcohol, but in the modern American diet, most people are going to eat a ton of carbohydrates, and then kidney dysfunction. And a lot of the blood pressure medications, especially the diuretics, affect that exchange of uric acid in the kidneys. And then the kidney's not able to pee out that urine, and again, you get your gouty attacks. And the way to prevent gout attacks is to increase the flushing of the kidneys, to decrease the intake of some of those purines, and purines are directly correlated with intake as well as production, to improve the liver by not battering it with tons of alcohol and certainly getting rid of insulin resistance, and then finally to dissolve those crystals better out of the joints so that they don't crystallize in the joints. But the easiest, simplest way to put gout into remission is a ketogenic omnicarnivore or carnivore leading diet, even if it is heavily fish and liver and organ meat based. Not as you get into ketosis, you can actually have a flare of gout, but as you become fat adapted, gout goes away. So here's my recommendation. Number one, if you want to treat the gout and so many other issues, put yourself on a slowly adapting carnivore diet or slowly adapting ketogenic diet. However, talk to your doctor and get prescribed some colchicine, which is a medication to reduce, it's a preventive medication as well as a treatment medication for gout. Put yourself on colchicine, a small amount, 0.5 milligrams once or twice a day, as a preventive medication for 3 or 4 months until you are measurably in insulin-sensitive, fat-adapted ketosis. And that process can take at the earliest 3 to 4 months. So cover yourself during that time if you've had gout attacks with colchicine. And if you're a patient of mine, I'd be happy to prescribe that medication as long as you're a patient of mine as you transition into a ketogenic diet. Then it doesn't matter how much purine you consume in your diet. Obviously, you don't want to go from carbohydrates to alcohol and become an alcoholic. We're not talking about that person. But you can then consume purines if your liver is healthy and your kidneys are able to flush that uric acid out. And after about 3 or 4 months, you can come off your colchicine and put your gout into remission. So there's no magic about this, folks, but understand the process. And there's a lot of quackery associated with this by people that don't understand the pathway. Glucose and chronic excessive consumption of glucose and alcohol, insulin resistance, are really the factors that drive gout. The consumption and the peeing out has an effect, but the most important effect is on the liver. So if you're prone to gout, go on a ketogenic diet, cover yourself with colchicine so you don't have those flares, and eventually you can come off the colchicine and be healthy with healthy uric acid levels. I hope that helps. I hope that helps you to understand this. Not difficult to understand, folks. Not that difficult. Most doctors will focus primarily on the consumption of purines and tell you not to eat this, not to eat that. It's not that simple. It's not about the purines in your diet. It's about the insulin resistance. You can eat I eat a ton of liver. I eat a ton of uric acid, or really purines that become uric acid, but because I'm in fat-adapted insulin sensitivity, I never have and never will have an attack of gout. So understand that it's carbohydrates driving insulin resistance that triggers gout, not the consumption of purines that most doctors will tell you, don't drink wonderful South African red wine, don't eat red meat, don't eat liver, don't eat beans, don't eat peas, don't live. I don't care if you eat that stuff. It's all pretty healthy. Get yourself in insulin sensitivity and also improve your renal function by not having hypertension from carbohydrates, carboholic hypertension, so you can come off your blood pressure medications and your kidneys are going to work better. I hope that explains it. I hope that gives you motivation. Focus on treating the cause, and you will be well. You can put your gout in remission. I am the Carb Addiction Doc. Follow me on Instagram. Follow me on Facebook. If you like this episode, throw a few dollars our way through our Patreon account. It's a charitable organization. The money doesn't come to me. It pays for these videos. And certainly, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at CarbAddictionDoc and feel free to throw comments out there. Take care. Take care of your big toes.